is that they're aware of the larger cycles of heaven, and they're aware of where we're at in that cycle, and they know that there's a great shift that's happening, that it's like all the cycles converging, and we know that they're at that, they know that we're at that time, and so what they're trying to do is to hijack the process so they can use the shift in this cycle to gain control and maintain control.
It's forecastable when these cycles will return. Suddenly, we don't have enough food anymore. Now, is it really because all those events were happening? Or were all those events put on top to explain away the crop losses?
So if you're like me, which if you watch the show enough, maybe I've worn off on you a little bit, I'm constantly digging. I'm constantly trying to understand what is behind what's happening in the world right now. Understanding the bloodlines of the people that are ruling the world, the geopolitics, the BRICS nations. There's just so much to understand, but sometimes you find these people that you can talk to that take you to this million-foot view where everything starts to make a little more sense. And today that person is David Dubine. Maybe you've heard of him. He's famous for his Adapt 2030 channel. But we're going to be diving deep into cycles and what cycles look like, what they are, what they tell us, what's being hidden from us. We're going to be talking about hidden history and why they're hiding certain things from us, what the so-called elites know, and where things are potentially heading next. So this is going to be, I'd say it's going to be a very heady conversation. I think you're going to really enjoy it because, David's a brilliant guy. And even in this conversation, I think that there's a lot of things that will click for you. So folks, please enjoy the interview. Mr. David Dubine, I have to say it is a pleasure to finally get you on the show. I've been following your work for quite some time, and it's great to have you here. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for joining me. Between us, our messaging here, hopefully this will get out to many more people so we can share the ideas here on how to get prepared for some of these inbound events. And please remember, it's more about perception management on the government side of things you're seeing than it is just the world falling apart. So to take that into context, we're going to talk about some solutions too. So yeah, it's going to be a good one.
And I have the feeling this will be the first of many interviews because there's just so many topics we can talk about. But one thing I'd like to kind of dive into with you today is just not even the 100,000 foot view, but like the 10 million foot view, right? One of my favorite guests is Martin Armstrong, and we were talking before we turned the cameras on, and you're also following his work and cycles, and I'm fascinated by looking at cycles and seeing the cycles, but then looking and, okay, where are we at right now on these cycles, right? And who knows about these cycles and who doesn't? And I have a feeling that, whatever we consider as the elites, that they know this information's out there and they're following it, and they're trying to hijack some of these cycles, which we can get into. But I would love to hear you just, and I know you have a presentation for us as well, but just to help us kind of take that really big picture view of what you're studying and the information you're putting together and presenting, and how that helps us understand what's happening right now. Because I would say that most of the audience and most people really in the whole world would look around and say, the world is not what it was even 5 years ago, and it's changing very quickly, and I'm worried about where it's going. I don't know where it's almost like it's like a car that's lost control, and no one can make sense of it. And that's why I think that what you do is helpful, because it helps us make sense of what's happening right now and where we could be headed next. So I'll hand it over to you, and I've got your presentation here to go through as you need me to.
Yeah, so take a real objective look at the world. Why has it changed now?
You'd think we'd be talking about the election, but lost in the noise is the greatest threat facing America's sovereignty. The dollar's being eviscerated as the U.S. is creating $100,000 of debt per second. The global de-dollarization trend is accelerating as BRICS nations introduce a new global currency called the unit. The unit would be pegged at 40% to gold and 60% to a basket of BRICS currencies. BRICS countries can mint the unit, a statement token, using the gold held within their borders. What do you think is going to happen with metals? Call the proud Americans of the Patriot Gold Group today before it's too late. And Patriot Gold Group has the No Fee for Life IRA, where your IRA or 401k can be in physical gold or silver. And you may qualify for the No Fee for Life IRA on qualifying rollovers. Give them a call, 888-546-7020 for your free investor guide today. And also Patriot Gold Group, rated Consumer Affairs top gold IRA dealer 7 years in a row. That's 888-546-7020. And now on with the video.
You know, a lot of these technologies we've had, they could have implemented the same change 20 years ago. It's not as if just because we invented this thing yesterday that the world needs to spin completely in a different direction. Unless there was energetics involved. That energetics themselves would disrupt our supply chains, cause earth changes, or the main thing I kept diving into when I started the Adapt 2030 channel and now the Civilization Cycle podcast is our ability to grow food to continue to feed 8 billion people. If that is thrown out of stability, because for the last 200 years, we pretty much wired in the planting dates and the harvest dates, the green revolution that allowed us to increase our crop productivity with new fertilizers and farming methods, irregardless of how high tech you are, unless it's inside where you can control the temperature, nature can absolutely wipe out everything in an instant. And we've seen that again and again and again. Now, what if you understood there's a cycle that returns that affects the jet streams and cloud cells and does exactly that on a pattern? It's forecastable when these cycles will return. And you might ask, well, who would have that information? You call them the elite. I just say it's the same controlling moneyed families, an invasive hominid species that has taken control of these higher reigns of power. So just a quick history lesson. If you go back to the conquistadors, we'll start at that period, approximately, let's say 1450, be generous. Where had all that information from all those conquered nations and kingdoms, fiefdoms or fiefdoms, however you like to say that, where has all that information gone? You're telling me about the entire Mayan era, they have like 4 or 5 codices that survived World War II. That's it? Out of an entire civilization that had been there for 1,000 plus years, we have 5 documents left. I really can't believe that. Like, where has all this information gone to? Well, if you look at the gatekeepers and controllers of information, we can pretty much name top 3 or 4 of whether it be the Vatican and the libraries there, the Smithsonian. You start to see how they really tightly tweak and control information. There's a level of them that are all spearheaded at the top that whenever there's archaeological finds, even if it's your own private property, they come in and usurp your rights of control over your property to either dig it and take it away or completely allow nobody to go and visit it and then rewrite history around that. So if you did that for 500 years, I am very sure that you would have found a similarity in rise and fall of civilizations with the specific signs in the heavens that were looked for. Signs on the earth in terms of electromagnetic changes of how animal life, the tides, humans themselves are perceiving reality. There's going to be an enormous amount of check the boxes of things to look for as you're going down this road. And what if you did come to this time and you realize that we're here again, and over the last 10 or 12 iterations of this, that the present way of life couldn't survive anyway? Well, then your best case is to, get on the lifeboat. But what's the lifeboat of today? It's the global economy. It's the lifeboat full of gold to reset and start a new economy. And so the lifeboat of the best technology and those minds to get them into the right places to restart another civilization after this one, it's not going to get wiped away. It's not going that direction. There's going to be enough disruption, if you will, death by 1,000 cuts, that this part of our road system doesn't work. That part of the railroad doesn't work. Our oil pipes don't work because of earth rifting and it ripped them. Suddenly our conduits aren't working. Part of our internet's not working. Then suddenly we become regional. And then suddenly followed by that, international trade ceases for a while. But then everything has to be restructured. Well, how long would it take to build a world ripped apart by the top 2 miles of our crust behaving strangely, our food production not being able to grow enough food for 8 billion people for, another 15 or 20 years, and then rebuild from that point? And that's how you really need to look at it. We wouldn't be having this conversation if everybody died because it was all ending, earth ending. No, it's just going to be a shift of our present way of life. And if you're prepared a little bit, working with others, you'll be able to get through this, just like we all have for the last, 12,000 years, at least since the Younger Dryas era. I like to talk about those longer term cycles as well. I know somehow, maybe it was too much to ramble for the intro.
No, I mean, it's great. And this is the kind of stuff that I love engaging in. And that's why I said that, what to do multiple shows, because even the whole thing with Smithsonian, back when I was in Ohio, so Ohio is a region that has a lot of burial sites, a lot of Native American burial sites, or a lot of giant burial sites. And I think it was even Abraham Lincoln talked about the giants in that region, if I remember correctly. I mean, as crazy as it sounds now, it's like, oh yeah, well, if they're hiding history from us, it makes sense that the history that's hidden from us seems crazy compared to the curriculum I went to school learning. But there was a guy that was working on our property that we got, became good friends with, and he actually, he was a tree cutter, and he was, kind of master at managing forest stuff, and he found on this lady's property, an older lady, he found a giant burial site, right? And he knew what to look for, and he identified it, and he had gone back, I think it was about 6 months or a year later, had gone back to investigate more. And he's talking to the old lady, and he's like, hey, come back. She's like, oh, sorry, the Smithsonian came, and that, what you're talking about, the Smithsonian came, and they did some digging, and they found a few things, but nothing really, and it's closed up now. And like, that's the story over and over again of how just one of the tiny ways of many that they've hidden our history. And so, one question I have for you that will help us kind of jump into just, the overall cycles is that, as I've tried to understand where we're at in history, the way I've understood it is that they want you to think that they're causing all these changes that are happening because it gives them this air of power and control. How we're going to have a great reset and everything. It makes you think that they're causing all these things. But the more I've dug into it, the more I've come to the conclusion is that they're aware of the larger cycles of heaven, and they're aware of where we're at in that cycle, and they know that there's a great shift that's happening, that it's like all the cycles converging, and we know that they're at that, they know that we're at that time, and so what they're trying to do is to hijack the process so they can use the shift in this cycle to gain control and maintain control over the next cycle. And that's what I've come to, but I want to see what your thoughts are on that, and wherever you want to go from there.
You described it perfectly. They're riding on top of a natural cycle because everybody with their own eyes is now seeing weather changes and climate change around them. Now, CO2, more CO2 for me, the better, because, if we get around 280 parts per million CO2, we go into an extinction level event on this planet. Their whole thing is they want to take us down lower in CO2 concentration, but we really need the opposite. We need higher CO2 concentrations to generate and, increase plant growth and crop yields. But if you knew these cycles were in, now again, you're talking about perception management. You have to control the entire economy to give people the confidence and the belief that in next year, 10 years, 50 years from now, you will have a retirement. So here's something to work for today. We're guaranteeing a future of sitting on the beach drinking margaritas. At least that's how, the traditional sense goes. You're going to retire and this. But if you knew, say, in late 1980s or early 1990s that this cycle was here, and it'd be very visible and extremely disrupting by the time we get around the 2020s. If you came clean with that, even back in the late 1990s when everything was still just perfectly functional, our society would have crumbled long before anything. Because I'm going to say a lot of people can't or don't want to deal with that truth to take the action and change lifestyle because of something that's inbound. Even when it's so crazy, a hurricane will come in, or a cyclone or typhoon, wherever part of the world you're in, and people literally will wait until the very last second, and they'll wonder why when they go to the grocery store that there's no food there when a hurricane's approaching, or the fuel's empty. Why is there a line at the gas station? Hurricane's supposed to be landing in 10 minutes, and I just came to get some fuel. Oh, hey, you took too much, and you're a hoarder. But just riding on top of a natural cycle. Now, you have to build the excuse in. See, again, it's front running. It's riding on top of something. You're front running it out. Okay, they knew the change would be here. We need to get all scientists on board, and we need to get the entire scientific community moving to agree on this thing that's going to happen in the future. So when people see it with their own eyes, they go, no, that's not the cycle. That's you driving your SUV. And again, how did they get all these scientists to agree? Well, they would remove funding for the ones who didn't agree. They would lose tenure. They would not get promoted. They would not even get hired. This thing started in the 80s. So we're talking about 40 or 35 years of time now. So that's nearly one whole generation of graduates that have come through this system. And what do they see? The old mentor up there, the guy who everybody revered, suddenly lost his job because he did not believe or write papers about CO2 warming. He's like, no, it's the sun. And they saw these top-level people lose their jobs, lose their livelihood, lose their homes, their wives, their kids, their careers, to just rake through the mud. Like John Casey, one of my favorites, who was a space advisor for NASA, had a 30-year distinguished career. He was the lead investigator on the shuttle explosion. You got to realize, lead investigator. And once he started talking about cycles, he lost his career. This is what they saw happen to the absolute leaders in the top echelon of science at that time. So when you see that type of destruction, you instantly, as a newbie coming in, are going to be, I'll say anything. I just want to keep my house. And the more you backed up and validated and regurgitated this CO2, the more funding you got. They're giving out money like it's, candy at Halloween for the proper papers to be written. So then you start to put all these pieces together and you start to, okay, well, this is obviously coordinated. And then anybody who even now comes out and says there's nothing, there's a lot of other information that temperatures are warmer in the past. We can go back even just recent history, like the medieval warming period. Got really cold in the modern minimum. What happened there? Why did it bounce back? Why did it get cold? Nobody wants to talk about the last 500 years in history. It's only the last 30 that count. Because all those other ones show that there was a huge amount of up and down fluctuations that just was natural. You're telling me 8,200 years ago, temperature drops out 3.5 degrees Celsius, and then it rises just as quickly after in about a 100-year period. Nobody, that's just, where is that in history? Nobody wants to talk about that 8.2 K year event. So these variances, they're there, they're stark, they're noticeable. And once you start to pick them out in history, and then all you do is say, all right, well, what happened at that time? They couldn't grow enough food. And you know what? People migrated. Governments were overthrown because they couldn't supply their people, and the economy crashed. That sounds like today. That's a fingerprint of this cycle here. We're seeing the exact same things. If you're looking at the population migration, you're looking at the economy reshifting, resetting, along with movements to central bank digital currencies and going far away from what was stable banking. So don't be afraid of it. Just understand, embrace it, because it is just validating, is a cycle that is repeating. We've lived through it once before, and we will live through it again. Don't buy the fear that they're trying to sell you. It's perception management for the human race right now. Control of perception. If I get another long answer, maybe I need to get a time. Where's my time clock?
No, that's okay. No, it's
shorter.
Great. It's hard to have short answers, I think, in this kind of a conversation. It's also why I only do long form interviews. I can't. A lot of folks do like the 10-minute, soundbite interviews. Like I hate that, right? Like I want to just sit down with somebody. I'd love to be doing in-person 3-hour discussions where we can really get into things, but this is the next best thing. So walk us through cycles, right? So for someone who's new to the term or vaguely familiar with it, what are some of the more common cycles that are easy for us to look at? Say like a war cycle, or this that you can kind of map back, and let's talk about how people do that, how they look at these events, and they find out that the same type of event happened 80 years ago and 160 years ago, and kind of back through history. And then also I want to get into how these cycles relate to larger cosmic phenomena, right? Because it doesn't matter what religion, whether someone's a religion or not, throughout history, all of the great spiritual leaders, right? And it's all throughout the Bible is the discussion of like looking to the heavens to understand what's happening. Why is it that in our modern society, we no longer do that, right? And you talk about it, and some people say, oh, that's sort of new agey stuff. And it's like, no, it's like as old age as it gets to talk about what are the stars doing, or what is the sky telling us, right? So I guess I'll hand it back over to you to kind of walk people through what a cycle is, what are some of the more kind of popular, easy to see cycles, and then where, the bigger picture of that.
Let's start with today. Sunrise and sunset. That's kind of the easiest one to notice for everybody, right? It goes to dark, gets dark every day, and then it gets lights every day, dark and light. Okay, that's a cycle. You understand that one. Then we have years. where it goes January and then it's December and then January we got summer, winter, spring, fall. Those are cycles. But how do we know they're cycles? So this is the key. Is you have to understand this point. It's the base premise of understanding a cycle is you have to see it twice to understand that it's a repeating cycle on a certain duration of time. You can't see something happen once and then go, well, that's a cycle. How do you know? It only happened once. But then we could take it really far out into the Ice Age cycles. These are the 100,000 year duration cycles. And I've always been, since even way back many, like long ago, years ago, decades ago, like what happened during the last interglacial? Because they had 10,000 years of warmth, the same brain capacity as us. I mean, a human from 100,000 years ago in the last interglacial, they could walk down the street. There would be no anatomical difference between any of us. Brain capacity, the same thinking. So they sat around for 10,000 years and created nothing in that last interglacial. Like, where is that tech from? Where is that information coming from? Yeah. And this one really seems to be strange because it's really squiggly at the end. Usually they peak up and then drop off. I mean, this is the longest interglacial by a couple thousand years longer than the last, I would say, 2 million years of interglacial. So we're doing the last 20 to 22 cycles. This is the longest one on 100,000 year. Now, how do we even know that's a cycle? Because we've seen it twice, 3 times, 4 times, and they know there's that approximate duration of 100,000 years in there in between those. So then you can map that out. And then you can, cut that into 4 segments of the great year. 25,000 was 770 years now instead of 775. But again, you'd have to see 2 cycles of that. So you'd have to rock up nearly, 52,000 years to see that play out twice to know it's a cycle. So some of these older, societies, civilizations, and those, who's keeping record of time for 50,000 years plus to at least know that great year came around twice? And that's the whole thing about it, is when you start to delve into the complexity of it, and then you hit the stabilization point or you hit the dissolve point every single time. Where when I talk about that, is the stabilization point is kind of where we reached. For the last 200 years, we've had some of the most stable climate we've had in the last 10,000 during these last 200 years. That allowed us to increase not only agriculture, but the excess calories allowed us to solve all these extra problems. You got extra food, you can do a lot more in society than if you're starving and just like living subsistence to stay alive. So when you come back into these Ice Age cycles, that climate had stabilized itself somewhere around 40,000 years ago, and I'll be generous at 40,000. Some say 60. But as stable as our climate is today, after the ice sheets locked in place, those weather patterns had stabilized after several thousand years, which allowed them to know also their planting and their harvesting dates. Although it would have been much further south toward the equator, the same rules applied. They understood when to plant. They understood when to harvest. So if their society was even longer, since say 40,000 years to say 20,000 years, 2 times longer than us. That's what I'm saying. I'll be generous. 2 times longer than we have. What did they create that is being hidden from us? Because you cannot tell me that the waking state of a human is just to sit around and sit in a cave and go, you know what? I am totally content here. This is awesome. I don't want to do anything. The whole society, the whole civilization of all the people alive for 20,000 years did not a single thing, and they had abundant food and water resources at that same time too, and they just sat there for 20,000 years and didn't invent a single thing. It's really hard for me to believe. It's hard for me to believe in an interglacial they didn't do anything with a lot of warmth. But down, if you're squeezed toward the equator where a lot of human population was during the ice ages, even more abundant food, because you ever go to the tropics, what kind of just amazing foods are down there that we don't get in the northern hemisphere here? So what I'm trying to say is that you have to see the cycle twice, and there's been many a time in history where the stability of climate has been way longer than we have now. So what was developed or invented at those times, and it had to have been different, because I do believe we would have found engine blocks somewhere. So perhaps their energy utilization or understanding vibratory frequency and the usage of these kind of energies would set up their society different. Now, if that frequency pattern changed because the sun changed, which brings us back to today's conversation of cycles, then their energy production system would have been disrupted, because the harmonics or the magnetic field that was stable in would have changed also. And then suddenly their devices wouldn't have worked any longer because the frequency changed or whatever because the magnetic field's coming from the sun that connects to our planet. Now, that outbound from our sun is going into another Birkeland current along in the spiral arm of our galaxy. So yeah, the energy is coming from the sun, but it's also connected to other sources outside our solar system and our regional star system. So if that changes, that current inflow into that changes, obviously their power source would be affected. And we're looking at it now as on the ground, our weather systems here being affected to the point where, why has your food doubled and tripled in price in the last few years? Do you think that just because they wanted to charge more for food, or is it coming to the reality now that we can't grow enough food to feed these 8 billion people? So now all the excuses in the world need to come out, and then all these distractions that are seemingly organic, like the war over here, the trade war over there, the disruption of this, those bad people there, suddenly we don't have enough food anymore. Now, is it really because all those events were happening, or were all those events put on top to explain away the crop losses and why it's happening? But the base root cause, which they will never, ever talk about, except they just did last week, was the change in the magnetic field and how that's starting to affect our planet and how we could harvest this planetary electricity right now. It's too quirky for me. I'm just really, looking at this thing for the last 10 years when not even a single sentence was written about atmospheric electricity. And then suddenly there's a bevy of news articles in the last 2 weeks going, oh, they discovered atmospheric electricity. We could tap that. Wow, it's a breakthrough. Yeah, okay. I guess I fell off the turnip truck yesterday to believe that one. Yeah. I'm done rambling.
Gosh, a handful of things is that one thing, so in understanding from what you're saying here that makes a lot more sense to me is that it's, as we're talking about with Smithsonian or whatever, that's just the tip of the ice. I mean, it goes so deep, but they've hidden so much from us. And I used to always just look at it and think, oh, okay, they're hiding the information. They're hiding the technology. They're hiding just the powers that we have as humans that no one's even told about. But also what makes sense to me now is that they've hidden a history from us because even a kind of mid-level person with a decent understanding of history can look at history and find the cycles. And so they've hidden those cycles. They've created these gaps where you can no longer see the cycles anymore, which is why I think like what Martin Armstrong has done with currency and looking at the currency and building cycles off of that is pretty ingenious. But it makes a lot more sense to me why, like you talked about the Mayans or the Incans or these ancient civilizations, that they've hidden so much from that, because if you could look at all that history, it'd be pretty easy to go and find all the patterns and all the cycles that would then show you, in a lot of ways, it would give you the crystal ball that these controllers have and knowing where society is going. Is that a fair understanding?
It is. So if they knew the cycles were coming up, my first thing as a sociopath would be like, all right, how am I going to keep my power? Don't care about them, whatever happens. Just, all right, you know what? We need to print a lot more. We're going to double the money supply so we can buy everything we need for continuity government, but we need an excuse why. Nobody will ask a question if we double the money supply on the planet in like a year or so. Like, what can we come up with where we can print endless money and just people will stay in their house and be scared and not even ask questions? Gee, let me see. What would that be? And, you start to get these overlaps of, you could start at the year, 2001 and with the whole in the 9/11, how the world changed tremendously at that time. But remember, that was just within a decade after they'd probably verified the cycle was inbound, that there needed to be more control over resources. There needed to be more control over the money supply and definitely more control over the population. Because if you're competing with the same resources they need, then you're a competitor. So for them, it's about survival and bringing the resources through to reset another society, because they can restructure it the way they want after. Because one thing I can almost guarantee, almost all of our data would be lost, because you know how much digital data is out there. Very few things are put into print right now. So anything in the last, say, 40 years is pretty much going to be wiped out. Unless you wrote it down, photocopied it, put it in a book, bound it, and have it in like a really nice, humidity-controlled area. Those papers are going to degrade over time. But at that same time that all this is happening, the magnetic change, the lobes of your brain are magnetic as well. So if that big thing on the left over there changes a magnetic field intensity strength or decreases our Earth's magnetic field, the way you're going to perceive information will absolutely change because you're housed within that magnetic field and your brain operates within that local field called the Earth's magnetic field. And then more generally, the sun's magnetic field that interconnects with ours. So is it really celestial changes like comets come rolling in? There's, tidal changes and earth slips and crustal displacement, and a liquefaction-based event? Or is it that human reality changes to the point where it scares the controllers, not the physical events so much, the perception of us seeing through their darkness because of the magnetic field change? Now, once you start to understand that, take it from that perspective alone, that, all right, the humans are all going to wake up here because of this new magnetic field that's inbound along with these cycles. The cycles are just validating that there's a magnetic field change state. So they're kind of overlap. One equals the other equals the other. So just if I was to measure magnetic field decline strength, we're looking at about what? Between 5 and 10% per decade now. It really sped up over the last 2 decades. So that would validate why we're seeing all the earth changes and all these, celestial changes. But then at the same time, all the celestial changes, would validate that the magnetic field was changing. But the biggest takeaway is perception of the rulership and the way that life is currently. We're starting to pierce that veil and look through that. And I was having a conversation with someone, and I said, eventually when this magnetic field state really hits its optimal for us as just the programmed human to see it for what it is, we very well may see everybody's aura for what it is, but the leaders at the top will be jet black and we'll see through it so cleanly. I think that's really what scares them more than a bunch of hungry people coming up going, I'm hungry, give me food. Once their control of reality, your reality, is broken forever, Humpty Dumpty never comes back again. Once you break through and see it for what it is, and the next several generations will not be under any control. Those controllers at the top will have to hide for hundreds of years before they come back out of their holes again. They'll have to wait that long until subsequent generations forget. That's what's so terrifying for them. It's not that there's bolides coming in and there's bigger earthquakes, not going to be enough food. There might be some, tidal disturbances that'll disrupt shipping and global logistics for a while. That's child's play. It's nothing. The perception when you see the evil for what it is and you can actually point at it and everybody sees it and in unison, 8 billion people say, it stops now. That's what's so terrifying for them. And I think that's why there's so much control over perception right now. A little woo-woo maybe there, but I'm just going with it.